It's 6 p.m. on a Friday here in Korea. Thank you for joining us for this newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headlines. South Korean, American, and Japanese nuclear envoys agreed to tighten the screws on North Korea to prevent provocations, including SLBM tests, and urged the international community to join the efforts. South Korea's finance ministry warns the nation's sovereign debt will exceed 60% of GDP in about 45 years unless the government can keep spending under control. Despite no significant increase in the consumer price index, the rising cost of staple food items has led to fears that all consumer goods could become more expensive. Chief nuclear envoys of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo agreed to put more pressure to deter Pyongyang's submarine-launched ballistic missile tests, along with other provocative actions from the north. Our Kim Hyun-bin starts us off.
South Korea's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, Hwang Jung-kook, held trilateral talks with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts in Washington on Thursday. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Policy Sung Kim and Director General at Japan's Foreign Ministry Kimihiro Ishikani led each country's delegations. The meeting comes after Pyongyang conducted another submarine-launched ballistic missile test last week, as well as a new tunnel being built at Punggye nuclear test site, indicating a possible fourth nuclear test. Hwang urged the North to stop all its nuclear activities and urged the communist regime to return to the negotiating table for unconditional exploratory talks to restart the long-stalled six-party talks.
North Korea should halt its nuclear and missile tests, freeze its nuclear activities, and reinstate IAEA inspectors at Yongbyon, which will be the start of denuclearizing Pyongyang and abiding by the September 19th joint statements.
Hwang also urged the international community to send a strong message to deter Pyongyang's strategic provocations, including SLBM and satellite launches. The three countries held its last chief nuclear envoy talks in Seoul in May, and the first since Japan replaced its top nuclear envoy in October. The six-party talks aimed at denuclearizing North Korea have been stalled since 2008, as Pyongyang demands unconditional resumption of negotiations, while Washington urges the communist regime to take concrete steps in denuclearization. The six-party members include U.S., Japan, China, Russia, and the two Koreas. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
After next year's budget plan was passed at South Korea's National Assembly earlier this week, the government released its first long-term outlook on government debt levels. But the debt-to-GDP ratio set to hit the 40% mark for the first time in 2016. Our Hwang Jie tells us what the country expects in the coming decades.
Korea's sovereign debt will exceed 60% of GDP in 2060 if the government fails to keep spending under control. The outlook coming from the finance ministry cites various structural issues that threaten the economy's long-term fiscal health.
Korea's population is aging at an unprecedented rate in the face of a low birth rate. This will raise welfare expenditures while the potential growth rate remains sluggish.
The figure is based on the scenario that government spending will keep pace with the country's nominal growth rate. The ministry adds, though, that Korea will be able to hold the level below 40% if it goes through a debt restructuring process. But with debt figures expected to surpass 40% next year for the first time ever, the government pledges to keep a close eye on possible risks to maintain fiscal soundness and come up with preemptive measures. While adding the core solution to the country's worsening fiscal health is maintaining a stable growth rate, the government says the 60% rate of debt to GDP is still far below the OECD average of 115% forecast for 2016. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Onion, cabbage, beef, and pork, the core ingredients for Korea's staple dishes like kimchi, pickled napa cabbages, or bulgogi, marinated Korean-style beef. But the spiking costs of these foods are raising concerns by households over inflation levels of consumer goods in general. Oh So-young has this report.
Farm-produced goods have become increasingly costly for households in the last 7 months compared to the overall consumer price inflation this year, which remained within the 0% range up to November. According to Statistics Korea, prices for meat, fish and vegetables have skyrocketed since May, when the inflation rate increased 2.7% on month. The price for a bag of onions has climbed significantly since August. In fact, the inflation rate spiked 98.9% in November compared to the year before. Cabbages also recorded an on-year increase of over 90% in June. And it's not limited to vegetables, as meat is becoming more of a luxury. The cost of Korean beef increased almost 12% on month in November, carrying the most expensive price tag in 5 years. Pork prices have also peaked to a 4-year high. As the cost of staple food items in Korea continues to rise, households may begin tightening the purse strings due to concerns that all consumer goods will become more expensive. However, experts say that the rising price of farm produce has a limited impact in the long run.
The consumer price index hasn't increased significantly, but consumers are more sensitive to daily necessities such as farm produce. Therefore, they may feel that prices are increasing on the whole. Also, farm produce prices are volatile in nature, so a hike in prices is likely to be temporary.
Production in general was low this year, exacerbated by the heavy drought. But experts maintain that Korean households shouldn't be too concerned about an increase in their grocery bills. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Volkswagen was the #1 selling import car brand in Korea for the month of November, dispelling fears the emissions scandal would permanently affect sales. Over 4,500 units were sold, an increase of 377% from the previous month when they sold less than 950 units. It also outsold all other import car brands, overtaking Mercedes and BMW. The upsurge has been attributed to aggressive marketing and sales discounts that Volkswagen dealers in Korea have been offering in November. Customers paying in cash have received discounts of up to $15,000. 60 months interest-free split payments were also offered on certain models. Meanwhile, Volkswagen sales in the U.S. continue to suffer, with November sales down 25% compared to the previous year. Following the passage of a number of finance-related bills at Korea's National Assembly, the time is ripe for the introduction of a comprehensive savings account. This all-in-one account allows holders to manage a number of financial products, and is expected to trigger a shift in the finance market. Shin Se-min explains further.
All of your investments in stocks, funds, and derivatives, and savings in one account at lower tax rates. The Individual Savings Account, or the ISA, allows people to manage all of that under just one account. It's a new scheme that offers those outside of lucrative investment circles the chance to pile up financial assets at lower tax rates in hopes of creating an extra sum of wealth worth $470 million, according to government estimates. It's a plan that comes with better profitability compared to other existing financial products, and only average income earners will be allowed to open an account. Following the expiration of a 5-year savings plan, or 3 for young Koreans or those with low incomes, the holder will be exempt from capital gains tax, enabling them to amass a good chunk of money. The tax-free limit for the ISA approved by the National Assembly was some $2,100, up $400 from the amount initially proposed by the Finance Ministry. But despite these benefits, experts say the cap was set at too low a range to produce more effective results.
In countries like Japan and the UK, their ISA tax-free limit reaches up to $8,000 or $25,000 per year, respectively, meaning that the amount approved by the government is too little to sufficiently benefit account holders.
Securities firms still anticipate a new group of customers will jump ship, as they believe the trend of low interest rates will help attract new account holders. But experts advise those interested in ISAs should consider factors like the amount of disposable income, the purpose of investment, and individual investment tendencies when opening this new account. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has held a summit with the leaders from the so-called Visegrad group, an economic bloc made up of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland. Our Hwang Sung-hee, who is traveling with the president, files this report from Prague.
In their first summit, President Park and leaders from the Visegrad group vowed stronger multilateral economic cooperation.
오늘 한 비세그라드 협력이라는 새로운 차원의 협력을 만들므로써 더욱 다층적이고 다면적인 파트너십을 발전시켜 나아갈 수 있는 터전을 마련하였습니다.
The Visegrad Group is comprised of the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland, which are four of the fastest-growing European Union nations. One of the key agreements in their joint statement is opening up Central Europe's booming infrastructure market to Korean businesses. The Visegrad Group has secured roughly 40% of the EU fund and will invest $43 billion on large infrastructure projects like subway constructions in the coming years.
우리 정상들은 에너지 및 인프라 분야에서의 미래 지향적 파트너십을 강화하기 위해 에너지 분야 협력 모색을 위한 대화 추진과 인프라 고위급 회의 설치에 합의를 하였습니다.
The Visegrad Group reaffirmed their support for the peaceful reunification of the two Koreas, strongly condemning North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The South Korean leader also called on the European nations to share their experience of successfully transitioning from a socialist economy to a market economy for securing peace on the Korean peninsula. President Park will depart for Seoul on Friday, wrapping up her 7-day tour. The latest trip, which took her to France and the Czech Republic, was the last presidential trip of the year. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Prague.
Back here in the nation, labor groups that staged protests that turned violent last month against the current administration's policies will take to the streets of Seoul again on Saturday. On the back of Labor Federation's promises, experts claim Korea is in a period of transition to peaceful demonstrations. Connie Kim tells us more.
Another mass protest against President Park Geun-hye's labor reforms and education policies will take place in central Seoul on Saturday after a court overturned a previous police ban. The Seoul Administrative Court said it was hard to conclude violence will definitely break out, especially as the organizers have repeatedly promised to ensure it runs peacefully. Police had attempted to ban the protest after a mass demonstration held last month turned violent. Some protesters from a militant labor federation brandished metal pipes and smashed up police buses, while police responded with water cannons and pepper spray to repel the crowds. Korea's largest demonstration in nearly a decade left many protesters and police injured, with one demonstrator still in critical condition after being knocked to the ground by a water cannon. Police have pledged to take stern measures if Saturday's rally turns violent. Experts say, however, Korea's protest scene may change in the future.
Using violence in protest was accepted when the country was fighting for democracy. Korea is currently in a transition period to peaceful demonstrations. From a police point of view, one of the problems at this point is the mindset of protesters, thinking they should clash with police physically to achieve what they want.
In what may be the first steps to peaceful demonstrations in the country, labor federations insist their members are not looking to vent their frustrations physically.
In order to convey citizens' anger towards the current administration, we will carry out the rally peacefully and within the boundaries of the Constitution.
Several thousand protesters are expected to attend Saturday's rally, and it remains to be seen whether there will be calm or chaos. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A crime scene reenactment of the so-called Itaewon Murder took place on Friday in Seoul. The judges are known to have compared the records of bloodstains from the 1997 murder to reenactments by the accused suspect Arthur Patterson and Edward Lee, who was acquitted of the 1997 murder after the first trial 17 years ago. The session was held in private at Lee's request, and no further details have been released. The investigation took place on a set constructed in the Seoul Prosecutors Office because the original crime scene, a fast food restaurant, has since closed down. Patterson and Lee continued to accuse each other of committing the murder, though both admit to being at the crime scene. Afghan Taliban leader Mullah Akhtar Mansour is reported to be dead after being seriously injured in a gunfight. Citing Afghan officials, Xinhua news agency said Friday Mansour was involved in a gunfight with commanders of a militant group. The Taliban has been divided ever since Mansour succeeded former Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar, who died in July. A Taliban spokesman has denied the reports. A huge arsenal of weapons and explosives have been found during the investigation into Wednesday's mass shooting in Southern California, which left 14 people dead and 21 wounded. However, with both shooters dead, the motive for the attack remains unclear. Kwon Jang-ho has the latest.
4 firearms, over 5,000 rounds of bullets, and 12 pipe bombs have been found in the car and home of Saeed Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik. Another remote-controlled bomb was found at the social services centre where the shooting took place. The couple also donned military-style clothing. Although the attack was initially thought to have stemmed from a workplace dispute, as the victims were colleagues of Farouk, the amount of weaponry and explosives indicates a level of planning beyond that of a random killing spree.
At this stage, we do not yet know why this terrible event occurred. It is possible that this was terrorist-related, but we don't know.
Later, however, the FBI warned it was too early to make such connections.
It would be irresponsible and premature of me to call this terrorism. The FBI defines terrorism very specifically, and we are still, that is the big question for us, is what is the motivation for this?
The local Muslim community has sent messages of condolences to the victims, but are looking to distance themselves from the atrocity.
Having a Muslim name, it does not mean automatically that the crime was committed and inspired by faith.
Many questions remain unanswered, especially with the details of the shooting being so unusual. Of the 355 mass shootings recorded by the Mass Shootings Tracker website in the last year, only 8 have involved multiple attackers. It's also the first shooting in over a year involving a female perpetrator. Bombs are also very rare in mass shootings. The investigation has just begun, but initial details aren't helping in understanding this senseless tragedy. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. More coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time.